Don't freak out. But the Warhammer 40K cards are actually coming to Magic Online tomorrow. Hello folks, Phil Gallagher aka ThrabenU here for another Legacy video, and instead of doing gameplay today, I'm going to tell you everything that you need to know about the Warhammer 40K cards that are coming to Magic Online tomorrow. Let's take a look at what we learned today. I was super stoked when I saw this announcement. So they are coming to the Magic Online store starting tomorrow, 10 a.m. Pacific time. And all 4 of the Warhammer 40k Commander decks are coming to Magic Online, and they are going to be $40 each. A little pricey, but so be it. But I got a little bit less excited when I read the following. Cards in these decks will not be made available in treasure chests, nor be part of any all-access period. The decks are only available in the Mtgo store until April 5th. Be sure you don't miss out. Now, I want to make sure that we understand what's happening here, because this is essentially a reserved list for Magic Online, which is honestly a little bit scary, because you might need 4 copies of Triumph of Saint Katherine, which would cost you $40 each. And heaven forbid that you wanted 4 copies of all of these, because they wouldn't necessarily ever be reprinted again and would be hard to get a hold of in the future. That would add up very, very quickly. So my heart sank a little bit when I heard that. But we're going to try to focus on the positivity here and be excited about these cards finally hitting Magic Online. I'm assuming this whole pricing situation has something to do with a contract with Games Workshop in order to get these cards to Magic Online, which has taken a long time. Daybreak Games, legitimately, thank you for finally getting these cards here. And without further ado, I'm going to highlight a bunch of the cards that I think are the best and most legacy playable from this set. I'm going to show you a handful of deck lists of things that actually have tournament results already and speculate a little bit on a couple of these cards. I had maybe an hour and a half to do some research and prepare for this video before I started recording. I wanted to get this to you all as quickly as possible. So if you think I missed something, let me know down in the comments below, and I hope you enjoy having a bonus video today. Let's start with what is likely to be the most impactful of the cards from the Warhammer 40k sets, and that is Triumph of Saint Katherine. I say this one is likely to be the most impactful because it won one of the Eternal Weekends, and we haven't been able to play with it. So, this is, kind of on the surface, a 5/5 lifelinker, which frequently will be done for 2 mana at instant speed off a Brainstorm. And honestly, that's kind of fucked up. This card is strong. You should expect this to be slotting into blue, white, X control decks, probably Bant with the way that Legacy looks right now. This is a very reasonable thing to play alongside Up the Beanstalk. Because if a 5/5 lifelinker wasn't enough, it also drawing you a card, or multiple cards if you control multiple copies of Up the Beanstalk, is pretty disgusting. Now, this does have some other text in the middle. When it dies, exile it and the top 6 cards of your library in a face-down pile. If you do, shuffle that pile and put it back on top of your library. So the idea is, if someone kills it and doesn't exile it, it is just going to come back a little bit later, and it's a miracle. Note that you can get into some weird rules interactions with some of the things that can happen here. I'm not going to go into that. That's beyond the scope of this video. And apologies, I can't do the normal visual view because these cards aren't on Magic Online yet. But this is kind of what you should be expecting to see. You know, we can do this better. Shoutouts to my sponsor, Moxfield.com. Okay, so this is kind of what you should be expecting to see from maybe a Bant plus a few colors control deck for things like Leyline Binding. So you're expecting Up the Beanstalk to cantrip off Triumph of Saint Katherine, Murktide Regents, Leyline Bindings, Force of Wills, maybe even Lorien Revealed as well. And if you're already setting up miracles with Brainstorm, maybe Terminus is going to make sense alongside this. Keep in mind that at this point, Eternal Weekend was a little while ago, so this deck has probably been iterated on, and if you do a search on a site like MTG Top 8, you can see some of the more recent deck lists as well. This is just probably the most well-known and best performing version of this deck that we have seen. So expect Triumph of Saint Katherine to be a menace, and maybe this will be something that will really put a damper on Ancient Tomb's presence in the metagame. As, like, sure, you're casting a bunch of goblins, but if an instant speed 5/5 lifelinker comes in the middle of combat, is that going to mess up your plans? Or is Broadside just going to menace through it and continue to do gross things? We'll find out. Next up is Chaos Defiler. And the first thing that I want to say about this card is it looks good, and it's better than it looks. So this is a 5-mana, 5/4 Trampler. And before we get into the text of this card that is actually good, a 5/4 Trampler that is hard castable is a reasonable body. Is that efficient? No. Is that as good as a Murktide Regent? No. But a 5/4 fucks in combat, and, like, don't forget that. We're going to come back to this body in just a minute. When Chaos Defiler enters the battlefield or dies, for each opponent, choose a non-land permanent that player controls. Destroy one of them chosen at random. So, since, there's not a whole bunch of opponents here, what this essentially means is you pick one of your opponent's non-land permanents, you get to destroy it. And this is on an ETB trigger. And this is an artifact. This is where this card starts to get really gross. So you are playing a deck like Painter that is playing Goblin Welder. You weld this thing in and out of play repeatedly. This enters the battlefield or dies. I want you to imagine the scenario where you have a Goblin Welder and 2 copies of Chaos Defiler. It is disgusting, and you run out of permanents so fast. And guess what else is commonly played in Painter? Fable of the Mirrorbreaker, which, I don't know, can copy your creatures. So not only are you going to destroy one of your opponent's best permanents when you copy that thing and it enters the battlefield, you are also then going to go and attack for 5. You know what's gonna then happen at the end of turn? Well, you're gonna sacrifice the token from Reflection of Kiki-Jiki, aren't you? Which counts as that thing dying. Goodbye, another permanent. This card looks good at first, and then the first time you see this in action, you're just gonna, like, have your hands, like, on your head, just going like, oh my god, this is some bullshit. You should expect to see this in Painter and Painter-adjacent deck lists. I randomly pulled an Agatha's Soul Cauldron, Phyrexian Devourer combo deck, but the general idea is going to be the same. You can tutor this up with your Goblin Engineer and then weld it in with Goblin Welder. And a lot of these decks will play either 1 or 2 copies of this. I faced down 2 in a tournament that I was in recently in Paper, and it was legitimately scary. Conceptually, against decks like Painter, a lot of times you will put some problematic permanent in play, and if it can't be removed via red damage, a lot of times they will have very limited or maybe no answers to certain permanent types, and Chaos Defiler just gets to break that rule. And a lot of times you might be safe. You might think you're safe with, like, some crazy enchantment in play, and you're just not safe from Chaos Defiler anymore. P.S. Just P.S. While we're here, this is CMC5. Broadsides. Broadside Bombardiers. Sends his regards. Next up is a card that doesn't really look legacy playable at first glance, but cards with Cascade always should make you a little bit nervous. Let the Galaxy Burn says that it deals X plus 2 damage to each creature that didn't enter the battlefield this turn, and it has Cascade. So what gives? Why is this good? Specifically, this is good within the shell of Creative Technique. And all this deck is looking to do is just repeatedly cascade into creative technique and win the game by cascading into cards that cascade into creative technique, demonstrating creative technique, and eventually attacking with a large hasty party or putting Emrakul into play. Well, part of the problem with this deck is sometimes you have issues answering something dumb, like a hate bear that is stopping you from comboing off, or maybe there's a large number of small blockers in play. Let the Galaxy Burn allows you to continue to cascade while dealing, usually 2, you're probably not casting this for more than 6, and honestly, you're probably not casting this a lot of the time, but dealing 2 damage to each creature that didn't enter the battlefield this turn. So guess what? Your creatures are entering the battlefield this turn. Your stuff lives, your opponent's stuff dies. And guess what? If you go and cascade into multiple of these, you can start wiping out bigger bodies, even if you are not investing any mana into this X cost. Of note, there is another reasonable cascade spell from the Warhammer 40K products, and that's Noise Marine, which is a 5-mana card with Cascade, and when it enters the battlefield, it deals damage equal to the number of spells you've cast this turn to any target. I did a search on this one. I couldn't find any lists with finishes for this, but this is a card that causes me to raise an eyebrow and say, like, maybe this does something somewhere. But I couldn't find anything beyond like meme level deck lists utilizing this card. So this one gets an asterisk. This one gets an honorable mention. It's not putting up any results now, but you should probably just be aware that it exists. Next up is an incredibly powerful card that is probably going to see vintage play too. Poxwalkers. This is a 3/1 Death Toucher for 3 mana. You're probably not impressed. But here's the important part. Whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, return Poxwalkers from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Well, guess what graveyard decks love to do? Cast cards from their graveyard. With Cabal Therapy, Dread Return, Hogak, Gravecrawler, Ox of Agonis, these sorts of things being the things that immediately come to mind. Note that this is whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand. So if you get tricksy, you could cast something from, say, your library, from exile or something like that, and return this as well. So for this one, I think I want to show off 2 deck lists here. The first is a Hogak style deck list, where you can cast your Gravecrawlers from the graveyard. And Poxwalkers also happens to be a zombie, which is honestly kind of convenient. So you can have some really cool lines where you discard Poxwalkers with Faithless Looting or Putrid Imp or whatever, and then bring them back relatively quickly. And it's also a black creature to help you cast the Hogak a little bit later on. There's a lot of synergy here. And similarly, you could also play this in a Madness style shell that actually goes a little bit deeper. And you can do like the Burning Inquiry, Lion's Eye Diamond, Flashback, Faithless Looting sort of thing. And flashing back something like Faithless Looting from graveyard can go and do Poxwalkers. And you remember when I said cast a spell from anywhere? When you discard cards for Madness, you send it to exile temporarily instead of putting it in your graveyard, right? Well, you're casting a spell from somewhere other than your hand, right? That triggers Poxwalkers. So you can Faithless Looting, say discard a Poxwalker and a Blazing Rootwalla, cast the Blazing Rootwalla, get the Poxwalkers back immediately. Like, that's dope as hell. This is a card that I am super excited to try out. And note that there are going to be other graveyard-oriented shells where this is going to be viable. It's not just going to be these. And I imagine you can do some gross things with it and Bazaar of Baghdad in Vintage. Alright, the next card doesn't look like much, but it's better than it appears. Mawloc is, at its base, a 2/2 creature. And when it enters the battlefield, it fights up to 1 target creature an opponent controls. If that creature would die this turn, exile it instead. So why are we playing this? Well, number one, it also does have a sneaky little X in its mana cost. And another keyword ability, Ravenous. This creature enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. If X is 5 or more, draw a card when it enters. So, at its base, this is a 2-mana creature-based removal spell for smaller utility creatures. That's not bad. And sometimes, if it's something small like an Orcish Bowmasters or a Mother of Runes, your Mawloc gets to stick around. But as the game goes on, this is a card that can scale up and become better and better. And what if you're playing something like a Gaia's Cradle deck and you just have 7 mana? Well, then you pump X = 5 into this. You get a 7/7 that draws you a card and fights a creature. Your 7/7 probably lives. So at its base, this is sometimes a 1-for-1. And in the end game, this is often a 3-for-1. You get a body, you kill a creature, and you draw a card. That's pretty good value. Why am I talking about this? Well, because when I searched this card, I found 114 different tournament results with Mawloc in it. And again, this is only from paper play. This is seeing play in Maverick, Depths, Applejacks, Delver, Cradle Control, 5-color control, like the Yorion, Green Sun Zenith control sorts of deck, Green-Red Initiative deck lists, 4-color Loam, and more. This is a relatively free inclusion in a Green Sun Zenith deck list to just be able to 3 mana tutor up a removal spell for a small creature. And this is really neat. It's not really worth showing off a deck list here because this is just going to be a one of in a deck list that contains a Green Sun Zenith. But this card is sweet. Keep your eye on it. There's one other good Green Sun target in the Warhammer 40K stuff, and that's Toxicrene. So this is a 2/4 with Reach and Death Touch, and all lands have tap, add 1 mana of any color, and they lose all other abilities. The first comparison I usually see to this is that people are calling this like a green sunnable Blood Moon, and that's not quite right. Blood Moon is often cutting you off of a color of mana, and it is trying to deny that resource. Toxicrene doesn't do that. Toxicrene removes abilities. So if your opponent is playing utility lands, you get to shut off those utility lands, and you just turn them into rainbow lands. They're like a Birds of Paradise now. Now this is going to be cool for stopping a Cloud Post, stopping a Glacial Chasm or Maze of Ith that is keeping you from getting a kill. And a 2/4 Reach creature with Death Touch lines up really favorably versus something like a 3/3 Dragon's Rage Channeler that is forced to attack every turn. You just block it, you Death Touch it, and your opponent's not killing it with a Lightning Bolt unless they also lose their Dragon's Rage Channeler or their Delver in process. This is admittedly a little bit slow, so you are likely to see this, let's say, in like a Nick Fit deck list that already has some other form of mana acceleration. Again, not really worth showing a deck list here because it's just going to be a silver bullet in the main deck or maybe even the sideboard of a Green Sun Zenith deck list. Have it on your radar. All right, next up is Canoptek Scarab Swarm, which is a 4-mana 1/1 flyer, which doesn't sound great, but we're not playing it for the stats. When it ETBs, exile target player's graveyard. For each artifact or land card exiled this way, make a 1/1 colorless insect artifact creature token with flying. So what gives? Why are we playing this? Well, reason number one is Wizards of the Coast has lost my Christmas list for the past few years and has not given me my Rest in Peace Hate Bear. It's unfortunate. but we're going to move on. Reason number 2 is that this is going to be great at hating on fair graveyard decks. And I want to put the emphasis on fair. If you are trying to stop decks like the blue-black Reanimator deck that is picking up a lot in Legacy right now, you probably want your Surgical Extractions, your Leyline of the Voids, your Fairy Macabres that are coming down much faster than this. But let's say you're playing against some fair, dirtily blue, up the beanstalk life from the Loam control deck list. Well, how many lands are you going to exile from their graveyard when you cast this card? It's got to be a decent number, right? So this is a card that brings friends. And I want to note here that you exile target player's graveyard. You can blink this, and then you can choose a new target. So you can make, I don't know, 4 tokens when this enters the battlefield, spread out a whole bunch of power, blink it with your Flicker Wisp, Restoration Angel, Yorion, Ephemerate, whatever, and then do it again, targeting yourself and making an even larger army. Also, if the game kind of goes to a grind and this just sits on the field for a while, you can just exile your opponent's graveyard again. And this mostly sees play in Death and Taxes, where this is something that you can Recruiter of the Guard for, and you can do something like Aether Vial on 3, put in Recruiter of the Guard at end of turn, pick up this, tick up Vial to 4, tap this in. Hey, then the next turn, tick up Vial to 5, pay 3 mana, put Yorion into your hand, and bam. You do it again, target the other person. And this can create an army out of nowhere. This, again, is mostly seeing play in Death and Taxes, but it's seeing play in some other adjacent deck lists as well. It's also seeing play in some artifact-based decks. So you might see this in a Mud deck that is a colorless prison deck, where you just have a shit ton of artifacts and lands. In fact, that's mostly what your deck is. So when you do this targeting yourself, it is an army in the can, and you might realistically be making like 6 creatures with this. I have also seen it in like an 8-cast style deck list, where again, you have a bunch of things that are hitting the graveyard from things like Emery. You have baubles that are hitting the graveyard, and this can be a relatively powerful way to generate a large number of bodies. And if you also happen to care about the artifact count for something like Urza's Saga, this can create a large number of artifacts at the same time. So I think that's most of what I have to teach you and tell you about the Warhammer 40K cards. All I ask is that if you have any neat ideas, if you think I missed something, if you start breaking something using these Warhammer 40K cards, let me know. Shoot me a message on Twitter, tag me on Twitter, let me know in a YouTube comment. And I'm super excited to see how the Legacy community is going to respond to these cards finally being available. And I'm excited to see a format shakeup because we didn't really get too much of that from our most recent set release. So folks, as always, I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. See ya!